everyone, and welcome to TLMF, a series of programs leading to the 14th edition of the World Association of Psychoanalysis Conference that will be taking place from February 22nd to February 25th. Now, this particular program is going to be focused on the complex relationship the speaking being entertains with language. And we are welcoming two of our colleagues today to discuss this topic with us. So Peggy Pappada from London, and so hello, and Rick Luce from Dublin. So Peggy and Rick, you're both psychoanalysts. You're both members of the New Lacanian School, and therefore of WAP. And Peggy, you also work as a clinical psychologist in the NHS, which is Britain's National Health Service. And Rick, aside from your work as a psychoanalyst, you used to be the head of Department of Psychoanalysis and senior lecturer at DBS School of Arts.
Yes.
Fine, so we're going to be starting with you, Rick, today. So you're going to talk to us about the maddening quality of language.
Language is maddening. Thank you very much, France, for that introduction. So psychiatrists report this diagnosis. A young man at 20 developed psychotic symptoms and was diagnosed with paranoid psychosis. When 28, he took out his eye with his finger, threw it in the bin, and when he was admitted to hospital, he said he had been using drugs for the last 10 years. The psychiatrist then changed the diagnosis to what they called a drug-induced psychosis, i.e., they concluded that drugs caused the psychosis. Two things. One, drug effects triggered a psychosis. Two, the onset was, as is often the case, followed by an attack on the body. Drugs are incorporated, and thus the body is involved.
Except that psychoanalysis doesn't approach such cases from that particular standpoint, does it?
Absolutely. For psychoanalysis, the question is how. The question is going to be to figure out what body is at stake. How is it affected by drugs such that it can cause psychosis? Drugs have a chemical structure, for sure, which affects the soma. However, the clinical psychoanalysis teaches us that what matters is the relationship speaking beings have with their bodies, in that what is affected by language and speech is the mystery of the speaking body. This is the body that enjoys or feels itself, and which, as Eric Laurent says, I quote, exists prior to any subjective appropriation.
So prior to any subjective appropriation, so do you mean before the mirror stage that Lacan observed at the beginning of his career?
Yes, this appropriation, or rather this body, has little to do with the mirror image, nor the symbolic as an order, but with the real materiality of language that Lacan called la langue, that threads through the soma before words become a functioning chain of signifiers. This is the body that speaks in terms of manifestations of jouissance. Indeed, some of what we feel or affects us has nothing to do with what is repressed, but has to do with the jouissance that agitates the speaking being. It has no subject.
So what about the imaginary of the body? What about the beautiful form?
Well, it plays an absolutely crucial role, as illustrated by this young man from the little vignette at the beginning, who attacked the unity of his body. In his work on Joyce, Lacan argues that l'homme, L-O-M, the human, you could say in English, with his or her body, is only guaranteed by the body, which implies that its status is precarious, if it is indeed dependent on the imaginary. This body, he says, can bugger off and feel strange to us at times. What can come to the rescue is what Jacques-Alain Miller calls adorption. It will provide some consistency, but only precariously.
Okay, so can we stop just a tiny moment on adoption? I don't know if I said it right. Yes. Where does this actually come from, this word?
Yeah, it's a neologism of Miller's from Pièces Détachées, which was translated and published in psychoanalytical notebooks under the title Spare Parts. And what the word does is it combines the clinical fact that we adopt a body and that we adore this body. Once it has been adopted, or even it is even given to us, and that forms then some kind of consistency.
Okay.
About the body affected by La Langue, Miller says, I quote, there is an equivalence between speaking beings. Psychotic or not, nobody escapes these jouissance events of the body and the madness that ensues of, to quote Éric Laurent, I quote, the meanings of jouissance that we lend to the language that traverses the body.
So what happened in the case of the so-called drug-induced psychosis that you were...
Yeah, that's a very important question, because what can happen is that the effects of drugs can affect this mystery of the speaking body and cause upsurges and invasions of jouissance that may affect the experience of the unity of the body. This body is given consistency, again through its adoration, but this adoration, can be seriously threatened by these upsurges and invasions and lead, for example, to an overvaluation of the capabilities of the body, like people under the influence of drugs who think they can fly and jump up buildings, that kind of thing. Or it can lead to the unity of the body falling apart. People who attack their body, their bag of skin, as Lacan calls it, in order to get at the void, which according to Lacan, we are unaware of, even in terms of the unconscious. If the body and its adoration are threatened by an invasive drug effect, the name of the father will help to restore this consistency. However, when the name of the father is foreclosed, the drug effect can trigger a psychosis, though other semblants can maintain some of its consistency. Thus, it is crucial to make a proper diagnosis, to apply an effective treatment, such as supporting some of these semblants, nominating or translating jouissance, all of which can contribute to restoring consistency. To finish, it's less the soma affected by drugs that matters clinically, but the body affected by language. Without the consistency that the name of the father can provide, and because of the precarious nature of the beautiful form, this body may, what I call, absquatulate. It's an old English word, not in use anymore. Yes, it's useful here, I think. Yes. It cannot squat anymore, this body, meaning that what was already not really his or hers, the body as one's home, one can be evicted from and or may fall apart.
Okay, thank you very much, Rick. Thank you very much for making it clear to us that language is not immaterial the way people assume it is, that it's on the contrary absolutely, yes, the reverse, isn't it? Yes. And therefore, what matters clinically, as you demonstrated with this little vignette, is the body affected by language.
Yeah.
Right, so we're going to move on to Peggy now. Peggy, whose title is All Meaning is Delusional, which is a kind of, I think, that echoes very well with your own title, Rick. So, Peggy.
Thank you very much, Franz. So, I feel that the age of outrage and indignation is upon us. Those of us who work in public institutions know something about the culture of complaint. Patients are above all customers, who are entitled by law to have access to their clinical records and every right to complain about what they perceive as mistreatment or shortchange. Clinicians must justify their clinical judgment, words, and act for the sake of transparency and collaborative care based on ideas of universal equality, fairness, care.
So this new sensitivity that you just pointed out probably drawing upon your experience in the NHS, this new sensitivity goes beyond the clinical realm at the same time, doesn't
Absolutely. Yes. In the non-clinical domain, the risk of offending and being offended is no less prevalent, at least in the UK context. Feelings matter, and today more than ever, words matter too. However, these are words that have been divested of their magic and treated rather literally, thus leaving no space for metaphor or misunderstanding. Do you feel hurt, upset, or downright pissed off by the language used? You must tell the offender about the upset they caused and advise on the correct use of language to mitigate the error. It is in such a context that sensitivity readers have gained momentum. Created with good intentions, sensitivity reading, a future profession according to Jacques Lamillère, entails reviewing the content of manuscripts to check for insensitive, offensive, or stereotypical portrayals of people, and then recommending changes to ensure the use of a respectful, culturally appropriate, inclusive language. Putting the fact of changing the art of someone else, often deceased, aside, what is interesting is the name itself, sensitivity reading, thus reflecting a universal sensitivity to language that is nowadays prevalent in Western societies. In the absence of metaphor, the word acquires a fixity to the code, and it is therefore struck by a program of language policing aiming at its sanitization, at what is deemed as proper communication.
Right, so we've all heard of Roald Dahl being rewritten in France. We've heard a lot about Roald Dahl recently being rewritten, but could you give us a few examples, precise examples?
Yes, well, instead of killing two birds with one stone, we should say feeding two birds with one scone, thus removing the violent undertone from this well-known idiomatic phrase.
I just want you to repeat it because I think it's incredible. Instead of killing two birds with one stone, so we can't say that's too violent, so we need to say feeding two birds with one scone. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah. I mean, it just doesn't mean anything. Go ahead.
Or instead of picking our battles, we should say choose our opportunities. Again, removing this violence, perceived violence. Yet, language is not a superstructure. It is not simply a question of reforming language to fit in a particular ideological use of a particular time. Language contains the whole course of the history of a society. The patrimony of all, Jacques Lamillère says in a beautiful text on the use of the compliment, another spontaneous poetic practice at risk of extinction. Yet, the more functional the language becomes in its aim to inform, the less it is suited to speech, that gift of language that gives it a body, says Lacan.
So, but at the same time, the more functional language becomes, obviously the less poetic it becomes as well. And Lacan, it seems to me, cautioned us long before sensitivity readers were doing their work. He cautioned us against this.
Yes, indeed. He did. During one of his visits to the US, Lacan famously claimed that the best image to sum up the unconscious is Baltimore in the early morning. This metaphor evokes not only the political aspect of the unconscious, insofar as it is in the city, in its movement, in the concrete language that people talk, but also the poetic dimension of language, which psychoanalysis relies on. It is the equivoque, the plurality of meanings, which favors the passage of the unconscious into discourse, Lacan will say later on. Yet this phenomenon of language hypersensitivity, attesting to the tautological use of the word, obliterates all resonance and as such the other scene of the unconscious. The individual is then spoken rather than speaking, by use of stereotypical language relying on signifiers that circulate in common discourse. And while this is an attempt at acquiring being, insofar as language engenders being is also what slips away the most in language. There's always a lack in being. Any perceived threat to it causes offense.
So how can psychoanalysis respond then, would you say?
Yes. So apart from that social psychosis where the word becomes the thing that must then be struck, there is also the madness that Freud, Lacan and Miller invite us to not guard against any idea whatsoever. Gone is the censorship of words and thoughts, to be a bit more psychotic, more perplexed, to not understand too quickly, for all meaning is delusional.
All meaning is delusional. Thank you very much for this paper and for this very topical issue. Okay, because it's really what everybody is talking about right now. So. My first question, in fact, to both of you, but it regards, I think we could start with this universal sensitivity to language that you pinpointed here, Peggy. And you pinpointed the dire consequences of this universal sensitivity to language. So to summarize, it leads to fixed meanings, well, the belief that it's possible to fix meaning. It rids language of all its poetic function and thus shuts out the unconscious. And it makes speech uninterpretable. So and it seems to me that in some respect, Rick's vignette and analysis here testifies to the clinical consequences of this strictly literal approach. So I was thinking maybe could you elaborate a little bit more on this diagnosis of drug-induced psychosis, which is kind of ready to wear? We could say it's a ready to wear.
I think that's a very, very precise expression. Yes, you come across a lot of that conclusion, that diagnosis in psychiatry. And what it avoids, I think, is the singularities that are always involved when one is marked by language, as well as the particularity of structure. And to be sensitive to these singularities at the level of the body, the jouissance experiences that are singular, and to be sensitive to the structure, I think we can then find a way of treating let's say the subject in a more tailor-made kind of way. And so, for example, that could be that when the body breaks down, when it falls apart through such a jouissance invasion, as it were, and there is no name of the father or other semblance to stabilize it or to create consistency, then that body does not function, it's not upheld by discourse. And so then it becomes important to make a connection to discourse. Now that can be, for example, I'd be very brief here, through the analyst being present in a certain way, such that the body can form a mirror and create some consistency for the patient. But other ways are to nominate the jouissance, to limit the jouissance, sometimes to extract the jouissance, so the analyst can be a depository in that takes the jouissance on board, as it were. But the problem is never standardized and always starting from the very singular jouissance experiences. So these are not tricks, techniques to deal with this. This literally is patient by patient.
That's right. So, and to come to you, Peggy, still on this the subject of this literal approach. Would you like to elaborate on the question of interpretation and how psychoanalysis relies on interpretation, which is actually almost, foreclosed by this new literal approach?
Yes, absolutely. What I would like to add is what Jacques Alain Miller punctuated for us a couple of years ago in his address to our Russian colleagues, when he spoke that basically that there is no listening without interpretation. And it is good to talk. We know that everybody, it's a kind of contemporary motto. Everybody can speak in their own name, in the name of free speech, which of course it goes together with this kind of saying, push to say it all, the truth, and also in this kind of in the name of I am what I say. But of course this implies that we are allowed to, while we have to speak, to listen, we are not allowed to interpret. And so psychoanalysis of course brings this other dimension, that interpretation opens up to different meanings, multiplicity of meanings, that the truth is varying or lying, or as Jacques Miller defined it as I'm telling you that you said something other than what you meant to say. So the intention of the ego is very different. It's disrupted by the intention of the other. And I think in this context, the idea of respect, which I referred to earlier in my text, changes drastically, because
and the question of offence as well.
Yes, yes. On the one hand, we have like respect as a universal value for the purposes of justice and equity and diversity and inclusion. On the other hand, we have respect that is more aligned with the ethics of psychoanalysis, which is respect for the other's alterity, foreignness. So we welcome as psychoanalysts this foreignness, which of course it's so in a way we welcome all delusion, because all meaning is delusional.
Yes. Great title here again. But okay, so maybe if just we have very few moments, just quickly, because I wanted to ask you on the subject of language. You're both psychoanalysts, as I said. You both work in English. I mean, your patients speak. You work in Dublin. You work in London. But you both come from different countries. So from Greece, from the Netherlands, Rick. So what do you think about Lacan's commentary extracted from Seminar 22, when he says that there is a resistance of the English language to the unconscious? I think that this is the subject that we've been circling around today.
Do you want to start?
Yes, I mean, my when I think of that is I go to the text, the early text of Lacan about British psychiatry and the war, where he speaks about the utilitarian ideology that defines the British culture. So on the one hand, we have utilitarianism and pragmatism, and which of course it is very much present culturally and politically. For example, the UK's Prime Minister wants to abolish all kinds of degrees that do not bring money. But on the other hand, we have what Lacan says in Seminar 20, that jouissance serves no purpose. So there's an antinomy there. I'm also thinking, I had come across a very nice video by Borges, who was actually saying that most of his English had been done in English. And he was saying that the English language has two roots, the Germanic and Latin.
Yes.
And this makes it a very rich language. So usually there are like two words to define one thing, and usually these two words do not really mean exactly the same. He gives an example of the Holy Ghost and of the Holy Spirit. So the Holy Ghost is a heavy Saxon word, while the Spirit is a light Latin word. So we have to kind of, and he also says that he says that basically the English is a very rich language in the sense that you can do many things with the prepositions, the phrasal verbs. So I think we have
the postpositions after the verbs, which is a particular specificity of the English language.
Yes, and it's a very physical language.
Yeah, exactly.
You can do a lot with the language. So we have to think also that there's a lot of English literature and poetry, and that traverses the centuries. So there is something about how to make it's ultimately how each person uses language themselves, and because I think language can be a bit more mad, taking some distance from the utilitarian.
Function. Okay, Rick, what a few words?
In that same seminar in RSI, Seminar 22, the lesson, I think, from February, he says in that same lesson that when he talks about the English language, that it resists the unconscious, that it has a tendency to slip to the alls. It's a kind of enigmatic comment, and so I was kind of thinking about that when that came up. And slippage into the alls, the way I read it is that it sort of slips away, or it's not slipping into the not alls, into la langue, for example. In other words, as Peggy is saying, it's a very rich language, it's a very precise language, and that is perhaps why he says that it is a language that's becoming increasingly universal. However, it is all the same very rich, because again, Peg is referring to literature. Look at Joyce, look at Beckett, and look at how they reduced Joyce, that is the language, to La Langue, essentially his La Langue, you could say. But if I may make another very brief comment, that there is and Becky was referring to it, pressure now in our society because of a confluence of reasons to make sense,
yes,
and to understand each other. So the understanding through sense. And so if we have to understand a lot, we're going to have a lot of competing senses, and we're going to beat each other senseless with it.
Exactly.
I think
Exactly.
Yeah.
Meaning breeds more meaning and produces
exactly.
more
Yeah,
meaning.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Yes.
Anyway, fascinating. Very interesting. Thank you both very, very much. Unfortunately, this is the end of our program, and but I hope you'll come back. And our next program will be in 2 weeks on Wednesday, January 24th, at the same time. Bye bye until then.